Hello everyone, welcome to PMFIS. I am Dr. Vishwjeet Kawar and here at PMFIS I am starting History NCERT lecture. So in these lectures we are going to discuss only the things which are given in NCERT chapter by chapter. So this is the second chapter of class 8 NCERT from trade to territory. In this chapter we are going to learn how this English East India Company, which started as a trader and finally became a political power in India. So we are going to see this transition from trade to territory, means how they transformed themselves from trader to a political power in India. So let's see the second chapter. Aurangzeb was the last powerful Mughal ruler. Remember, Aurangzeb was not the last Mughal ruler, but he was the last powerful Mughal ruler. He established control over large part of India. After his death in 1707, many Mughal governors and big zamindars began asserting their authority and established regional kingdoms. Means after the death of Aurangzeb in 1707, many regional power emerged. Remember this mnemonic Badshah. For Mughal emperor we called Badshah. So this mnemonic is Badshah for Mughal emperor. B for Babur, H for Humayun, A for Akbar, J for Jahangir, SH for Shahjahan and A for Aurangzeb. Remember Aurangzeb was the last powerful Mughal emperor. After his death in 1707, the successors were not that strong. So the successors were weak. Suppose Aurangzeb was ruling from Delhi. There were many regional states and regional rulers, but they were not declaring their independence or they were not showing their authority because Aurangzeb was strong. But after his death in 1707, when the successors were weak, these regional powers they were showing their authorities, means they were coming as a dominant force in India. So in the 18th century, in the beginning of 18th century, there was emergence of regional power. Emergence of regional power. We can also divide this regional power into different categories like successor states, new states, and independent states. This is what was happening in the first half of 18th century. By the second half of 18th century, a new power was emerging on political horizon. Which was that new power? New power, British, means English East India Company. If you see Indian side in the 18th century, there was decline of Mughal and rise of regional powers. But if you see these European companies who came to India for trade, like Portuguese, Dutch, English, and French. Remember this P, then D, E, F. Portuguese, Dutch, English, and French. There was strong competition among all of them and they fought against each other. Finally, English defeated all of them and emerged victorious. So, in the European companies, English East India Company was dominant. In India, regional powers were dominant. So, in the second half of 18th century, these regional states fought against English East India Company and finally English East India Company became a ruler. So we are going to see this transition from trade to territory. So let's start with this arrival of English East India Company. So in 1600, English East India Company acquired a charter from rural of England, Queen Elizabeth I. What was the charter about? Granting it the sole right to trade with East. Sole right means the Queen Elizabeth I had given this exclusive right to English East India Company, means no other trading group in England could compete with East India Company. They have this exclusive right. But remember, who has given this? This was given by Queen of England, means no other company in England could compete with them for the trade in East. But other European powers or other European companies could compete with them, not from England but other European countries. So this royal charter could not prevent other European companies entering in the eastern market. And remember, they came to India and set up their first factory in Surat in 1613. But before that, Portuguese and Dutch already arrived, and after this England, this French East India Company also arrived. So Portuguese set up their first factory in 1500 at Calicut. Dutch set up at their first factory at Masulipatam in 1605, English at Surat in 1613, and French at Surat in 1668. So even before the British, who came? Portuguese and Dutch. And after the British, French also came to India as a trader. But there is a biggest problem. All companies were interested in buying the same things. Suppose they are buying same things, so there is a strong competition in buying the goods, and all were selling the same goods in Europe. So because of this competition, the price at which they were getting these goods, it was increased, and because of that their profit was decreased. Suppose this is Indian trader, he was selling his good at rupee 100 for Portuguese. After that there is Dutch, English and French. So he will demand for maybe 120 rupees, for 160 rupees. French will demand for maybe 200 rupees. So if they are selling at 500 rupees in European market, earlier they were getting 400 rupees profit. Now they will get 300 rupees profit. So because of this competition, their profit got reduced. So there is now only one way to increase their profit is to eliminate the rivals. To eliminate the rivals, and because of this, there was a fierce battle among them. And finally, among these Portuguese, Dutch, English, and French, English defeated all of them and became a supreme European power in India. Supreme European power in India means they did not have to face competition with other European companies. Now, if you see European side, there is only one supreme power, which was English East India Company, and in Indian side there were regional states. Now they will fight against each other for political supremacy. So there is one question. English East India Company was basically a trading company. They wanted more and more profit. So now why they want this territory or political control? Remember, to increase or to expand their trade, to increase their profit, they need to fortify their settlement. They need more and more trade concession. It's not possible for any ruler, Indian ruler, to give them unlimited concession, unlimited right for the fortification. So once they recognize this, that this ruler can't give us what we are demanding, there is a conflict. So the conflict was inevitable, and this conflict finally led to the annexation of Indian state. So in this chapter, we are going to see this annexation of Indian state from 1757 to 1857. But you have to remember few points. East India Company rarely launched a direct military attack. So how they annexed this Indian state? They used various policies. They used their political, economic, and diplomatic methods so that these rulers are dependent on East India Company. Once they are dependent on East India Company, East India Company annexed these kingdoms. Means they rarely launched the direct military attack. Most of the times they used various policies. You can see these policies are ring fence policy, subsidiary alliance policy, policy of paramountcy, and doctrine of lapse. So in this chapter we are specifically dealing with East India Company versus regional powers, Bengal, Mysore and Marathas. Now we will see East India Company in Bengal. In this section we are going to learn about the East India Company's trade in Bengal under three headings. First is how they established trade factories in Bengal and how they got this trade concession. Second important is how this trade led to this conflict with Nawab, and third is finally how they established their role in Bengal. So first is trade concession. So first English factory was set up on the bank of river Hooghly in 1651. Remember, this was not the first factory in India. This was the first factory in Bengal. We have already seen English set up their first factory in India at Surat in 1613. So the factory in Hooghly in 1651 was the first factory in Bengal. Once they established their trade factories in Bengal, they were started demanding. more concession, more trade concession, and finally in 1691 Aurangzeb issued a royal farman. Royal farman. Farman means royal order. So Aurangzeb issued farman, and the East India Company got duty-free trade. Duty-free trade. Duty-free trade means while exporting or importing their goods, they don't have to pay any charge. They just have to pay annually 3000 rupees. So just by paying the 3000 rupees, they can do this trade. So they were getting more and more concession. Again, in 1696, they started the fortification, and after 2 years, means in 1698, they got zamindari of three villages, and one of the village was Kalikata, which finally grew into Calcutta or modern day Kolkata. So, in the beginning itself, in the Bengal, they got many trade concession. If you see in 1691, Aurangzeb issued Farman granting East India Company the privileges of duty-free trade. 1696, they built a fort around their settlement in Calcutta, which was formally named as Fort William in 1700. And in 1698, they bribed the Mughal official and acquired the zamindari of three villages, Sultanati, Kalikata and Govindpur. This Kalikata is modern day city of Kolkata or Kolkata. So we have seen this early establishment of the British factories and trade concession. Now the next heading is how this trade led to the battle. Now we know East India Company got the trade concession. Because of the trade concession, they were making the profit. But you have to understand two things. The trade concession was given by Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb was the Mughal emperor. And suppose if East India Company pays revenue, then it will go to the Nawab of Bengal. Nawab of Bengal. So if East India Company is not paying the revenue, not paying the taxes, that means it's a loss of Nawab of Bengal. And after the death of Aurangzeb in 1707, means in the 18th century, we already know there was emergence of regional states. So this Nawab of Bengal became powerful in early 18th century. At the same time, English East India Company was not paying the taxes, means they were using this duty free trade. And at this time the Bengal was led by powerful Nawabs. You have to remember the three name Mas, Murshid Kuli Khan, Alivardi Khan and Sirajuddaulah. So these were powerful ruler, and they demanded that British or English East India Company has to pay this due. Means they were actually refusing to grant the company concession. They demanded a large tribute from the for the company's right to trade. They also denied any right to mint coins, stopped it from extending its fortification. Means there were basically two things. Company demanded duty-free trade plus fortification. At the same time, these Nawabs were rejecting both of the demand, that is they were not accepting the demand of the duty free trade. They were also stopping the company from further fortification, and finally this conflict led to the confrontation and finally battle of Plassey. Now you know why this duty free trade or fortification was controversial, or at least the reason for the conflict. So Nawab of Bengal, they refused this trade concession. They denied any right to mint coins. They also against this fortification. And one more thing is this East India Company was interfering in their internal politics. So Nawab of Bengal were against this. But East India Company claimed that they can make this good profit only if they can fortify more and more settlement, and if they get this duty free trade. Means they were demanding the trade concession and Nawab of Bengal were not accepting. So this finally led to Battle of Plassey in 1757. Remember, I already told you there were three main rulers who were ruling this Bengal in 18th century: Murshid Kuli Khan, Alivardi Khan and Sirajuddaulah. Alivardi Khan died in 1756 and Sirajuddaulah became a Nawab in 1756. Now the company was worried about his power and keen on puppet ruler, means company wanted someone yes man, like someone who can give more and more concession to the company. So company was finding some rivals to Sirajuddaula. And remember, at the same time, there were some conflict between East India Company and Nawab. So finally, this led to Battle of Plassey. In the Battle of Plassey in 1757, Robert Clive led the company's army against Sirajuddaula and they defeated the Nawab of Bengal. One of the main reason for the defeat of Nawab was force led by Mir Jafar. So Mir Jafar was one of the Sirajuddaula's commander and he was managed by East India Company. Means East India Company promised him to make the Nawab. So his force never fought this battle. That's why the Sirajuddaula was defeated in Battle of Plassey. So immediately after this Battle of Plassey, Sirajuddaula was killed and Mir Jafar became the Nawab. So now you know this chronology, importance of this Battle of Plassey. So once the Sirajuddaula was defeated in Battle of Plassey, Mir Jafar became Nawab. So the expectations of company that now we have placed this Nawab Mir Jafar on the rule. So he has to give more and more concession. But remember one thing, even though Mir Jafar was puppet ruler, he also has his image like he was the Nawab, right? So he thought that company has placed me on the throne, now I am giving them concession, but I can't give complete concession. So when he protested, company again deposed him and placed Mir Qasim on his place. But the problem was Mir Qasim was more harder. He was more stronger than Mir Jafar. So again, when he protested, he fought against this East India Company. Once he was fighting against the East India Company again replaced Mir Qasim by Mir Jafar in 1763. Remember, in 1763, who was the rural or Nawab? Mir Jafar. At the same time, Mir Qasim was fighting against this English East India Company. Finally, in 1764, Nawab of Bengal, Nawab of Awadh, and Mughal Emperor. They three fought against the English East India Company in Battle of Buxar, but English East India Company defeated the combined force of three in Battle of Buxar. Remember, Battle of Buxar was fought by Mir Qasim, but at that time, who was the Nawab? Mir Jafar. So finally, in 1765, British thought that even if we are placing these puppet rulers, they are not useful for us. So let's have this revenue right with us. So in 1765, they signed this Treaty of Allahabad. Now they have defeated this Mughal Emperor in 1764. So Mughal Emperor gave East India Company's Diwani right. Remember, in any state, there are two important functions. First is Diwani, means collection of revenue. Second is administration. So now in 1765, East India Company got this Diwani right. They had the chance to complete annex the state of Bengal, but now at this stage they don't want this administration because doing this administration is a responsible work. So they don't want to take this responsibility. So they just got this Diwani right in 1765. We call this as a dual government. East India Company was responsible for this Diwani right and Nawab was responsible for this administration. Finally, this dual administration was cancelled in 1772 and English East India Company acquired both the right, Diwani right as well as this administration. So now in 1772, company got complete control over Bengal. Now we will see the expansion of East India Company's rule. See, in this chapter we are going to see East India Company's fight against ruler of Bengal or against Mysore, against Maratha or Punjab, Afghanistan or Sindh, etc. But remember one thing, these fightings for the annexation of states were very few because most of the time East India Company used the political, economic and diplomatic methods, means they use the different strategies to annex the states. So they are rarely launching this direct military attack. If you analyze the process of annexation of Indian state by East India Company from 1757 to 1857, the company rarely launched a direct military attack. Now, in this means against this Maratha or Mysore, we are seeing this battle. That doesn't mean every time for the annexation British used battle. No, they rarely launch this direct attack. They most of the times use the different methods. We have already seen this ring fence policy or subsidiary alliance and etc. So now here we are going to analyze this subsidiary alliance policy, how this policy helped East India Company to annex Indian states. See, under this subsidiary alliance policy, actually Hyderabad was the first state to sign this subsidiary alliance policy. Then ruler of Mysore, Tanjore, Awadh, Peshwa, etc. They have signed this subsidiary alliance policy, the subsidiary alliance. So under this subsidiary alliance, Indian rulers were not allowed to have their independent force. So for the Indian states, this East India Company was providing the army. We call it as a subsidiary army. But whatever this army need resources or money, they have to provided by the Indian state. Means this army was maintained by East India Company, but to maintain this army, whatever money is required is provided by Indian state. So in due period of time, this Indian state would not have any army. It was completely dependent on this subsidiary force which was under the control of East India Company. So whenever the ruler is weak or ruler is not favorable, when the ruler is not favorable for the East India Company, they can easily replace this ruler. Why? Because now this ruler don't have any independent army. So to maintain this army, East India Company asked the state to pay this for this subsidiary force. If they don't pay this for this subsidiary force, they have to give some land so that East India Company use the revenue from this land. And when they failed, means when the Indian state failed to make the payment for this, they usually give this land. We have this example of Hyderabad as well as Awadh. They both were forced to give their territory to the company as they were not able to pay for this subsidiary force. So British not only launched this direct attack, they devised many strategies, many methods, many systems to annex these Indian states. Now we will see East India Company against Mysore. So Mysore had grown in strength under the leadership of powerful ruler like Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan. Tipu Sultan was son of Hyder Ali. So Hyder Ali ruled from 1761 to 82 and Tipu Sultan from 1782 to 99. Actually, this Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan are favorable for French and not East India Company. They had this close relationship with French, and they also modernized their army with the help of French. Now, suppose English East India Company is powerful and this Mysore was close to the French East India Company. Can this East India Company tolerate this? No. So they fought against this Mysore. So they had this four war with Mysore. Two when there was Hyder Ali and last two with Tipu Sultan. And finally Sultan was killed in this fourth battle and Mysore was placed under the former ruling dynasty of Vishwjeet. So, before this Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, the Mysore was ruled by this Vishwjeet dynasty. So, most of the territory British annexed and some part of the territory was placed under this Vishwjeet. So, this was about this Mysore. The next is Marathas. Remember one thing, after this third battle of Panipat in 1761, the Marathas' dream of ruling Delhi was shattered. Means they were not that powerful, they were weak. And if you see this Maratha, they were divided into many states under different chief. We called it as a Sardar, and they have this Gharana or family, Sindhya, Holkar. Gaikwad, and Bhosle. These chiefs were held together in confederacy under the Peshwa. So Peshwa was the main, and all these are just these gharanas or families. So Marathas were very powerful, but after this third battle of Panipat, they were not powerful as earlier period, but still they were the strongest force who can fight against this British. And this British or East India Company also fought three wars with Marathas. First war in 1782, where there was no clear victor, and it was ended by Treaty of Salbai. They fought the second war in 1803 to 05, and they defeated these different Sardars in second war. And finally, English East India Company defeated Maratha in third Anglo-Maratha war, and they abolished this Peshwaship. They removed the Peshwa and sent away to Bittur near Kanpur. So now they annexed this Maratha state. So now we have seen East India's companies fight against ruler of Bengal, then Mysore, and last Marathas. We have also seen there is one of their strategy like subsidiary alliance. Now we will see this policy of paramountcy. So in the early 19th century, company pursued an aggressive policy for territorial expansion, and this Lord Hastings was the Governor General from 1813 to 1823. So he devised this new policy of paramountcy. According to him, the company's authority was paramount or supreme. Hence, its power was greater than Indian state. In order to protect its interest, it was justified in annexing or threatening to annex any Indian kingdom. Means, according to the Lord Hastings, the company's power was supreme power, so they can annex any Indian state. But remember, whenever they devise policy, it's not like that Indian rulers have accepted. No, Indian rulers have not accepted. And here we have this one example of Rani Chennamma. Rani Chennamma, she resisted against this policy of paramountcy. Next, in late 1830s, East India Company was worried about the Russia. During this time, in the initial part of 19th century, they imagined that Russia might expand across Asia and enter India from the northwest. So because of this fear, they fought war with Afghanistan from 1838 to 1842 and established the indirect rule there. Then in 1843, they annexed this Sindh, and after the death of Raja Ranjit Singh in 1839, they fought two wars with Sikh and finally annexed the Punjab in 1849. Now we have seen how this East India Company was expanding their rule from 1757 to 1857. In 1757, they fought against this Nawab of Bengal. They defeated in the Battle of Plassey, then Battle of Buxar. Then they finally established their rule in Bengal. Next, they fought against Mysore again with Marathas. They also devised this policy of subsidiary alliance. Then Lord Hastings devised this policy of paramountcy. In the 19th century, in the first half, they defeated all these Afghanistan, Sindh, and Punjab and annexed this Indian state. Now, in the last, you will see this doctrine of lapse. So, the final wave of annexation occurred under Lord Dalhousie. So, his policy is known as doctrine of lapse policy. Remember, he was not the originator of this policy, but he pursued this policy more aggressively than his predecessor. Means those who have come before him, they have not used this policy more aggressively. Under this policy, under this doctrine of lapse policy, if Indian ruler died without a natural heir, means without the natural son, if Indian ruler is died, this adopted son don't have this legal right of inheritance. Means adopted son can continue this rule only if East India Company approved. Means it was completely depend on this East India Company, and by using this doctrine of lapse policy, they annexed this Satara in 1848 after the death of Appa Sahib. After the death of Appa Sahib, they annexed this Satara. Satara was the first state annexed by the Dalhousie under the doctrine of lapse. And not only this Satara, they have also annexed this Sambalpur, Udaipur, Nagpur, and Jhansi. Now they wanted to annex this Awadh, but Awadh was very friendly with East India Company. Awadh has even signed this subsidiary alliance. Again, this ruler of Awadh had many sons, so this doctrine of lapse can't be used against this Awadh. So now they have used this strategy of obliged by duty. Means they accuse that Nawab of Awadh was doing some misgovernment. Misgovernment means he was not uh, doing this administration properly. So now English India Company is obliged by duty and they depose this Nawab. So, in order to give the good administration to Awadh, they annex this Awadh. That was the company's explanation for annexing this Awadh. Thank you so much, and I hope you understood how this East India Company transformed from trader to the political power in India and how they annexed Indian state from 1757 to 1857. I hope this video was useful for you to understand the NCERT in better way.